So in the year 2003, a game called Star Wars Knights Star Oh, it just went live. So, in 2003, a game called Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic came out. I was but a wee lad at the time. I don't think I even had a computer capable of playing that game, and or even access to one at that time. But around 2006, maybe 2007, I did get the chance to play it. Um, I won't go into the details of that, but it became one of my favorite games ever. And I was quite young at that time, and at the end of the game, or near the end of the game, actually that's not true. Throughout the game, but especially towards the end of the game, there are these temples, and they have these, um, I guess, computers that are an ancient artificial intelligence kind of machine slash interface slash computer. And from what I remember, because it's been literally years since I've played, but from what I remember, they had this kind of this access to this ancient knowledge of the peoples, or the race that created them, and were able to kind of extrapolate from your interactions with the computer to basically create a new language, or not create a new language, but understand your language, if that makes sense. So, as a wee lad, I always thought to myself, "Man, that's really interesting. That's really cool." I hope you can hear me. But all this to say, when I was younger, I consistently thought about this, and it was something that, as I grew up, even in high school, I was thinking about, like, how could a computer like that work? How could you have a computer that could hold everything? Or, for example, could a computer hold information on everything in the universe? Because that would necessitate, like, could there be a computer that could hold every aspect of the universe? And I'm not sure if it could, because that would also include the computer itself, if that makes sense. So I would think about this kind of thing, and I thought to myself, it'd be really cool if you could have a computer that could store all of the data from, like, anything in one spot. It'd be really cool if you could have a, for example, a library that could sync up with all this information, and kind of have a way to protect all that information in perpetuity forever, period, right? And so I thought, well, one of the biggest problems is, like, I guess, compression and file size. And so I was thinking, for example, I'm not saying that I did this, but if someone were to pirate a video game, for example, or to download a file on the internet, let's say that you have like a 2 hour movie, that is a certain size, right? And it's encoded in a certain way. But so let's say that you have like a 2 gigabyte file, and it's a movie. When you take that file and you plug it into your computer, there's a lot of it, you're essentially transferring a bunch of information to another thing that can take that information, interpret it, and present it to you in a specific way, right? What if you could, like, completely compress that information, um, losslessly, and make your USB, for example, way lighter, right? So all that to say, like, what if you could take a gigabyte size file and turn it into like 10 kilobytes or something like that? Like, just, I'm just throwing numbers out there. I'm not saying that they mean anything. But I thought about this a lot as a little kid. And so before going to what I kind of thought of as a child, not as a child, but as a teenager, um, I want to preface it by saying I don't know what I don't know. And I was always interested in computer science. I've always been interested in computers, gaming. Um, I've always really enjoyed and loved it. And the problem on my end is that um, my brain just doesn't really work in numbers very well. For some reason, it's just it's tough for me. Um, Now we live in the age of AI where I can learn all the things that I have blind spots in, and it helps me a lot. Um, like I've always quote unquote sucked at math, but I've always known how much I want to know about math, and I've always struggled with it really really hard. I don't know if it's a intellectual thing or what, but all this to say, what I'm talking about, I'm some variation, some incarnation or flavor of this idea, I'm sure has to exist in computer science in one way or another. And I do have like a very high level understanding of, when I say high level, I don't mean I have a very high amount of understanding. I mean, I have a um, general understanding of how the stuff works. I have a big interest in encryption. I have a big interest in cryptography, things like that, and puzzles and games and all that stuff. I do that a lot for fun. And so I do have a general understanding of how this stuff could work or how it works. Um, but there might be something that I'm exactly describing that already exists. If not, this might be a novel way of holding that data. Okay. So all this yapping aside, what I'm talking about is this idea, for example, let's say that you take the word fish and you just assign it the letter A. It's just a simple variable, okay? Fish is A, um, and then you turn C into B, and you turn in into D, okay? Simple variables, nothing crazy. All of a sudden, you could take D, A, B, and this now says fish in C, okay? Super easy, super simple, not crazy at all right? And now what if you could do that with like anything, with a picture, with a video, as audio, like any information that you could abstract into this little, this simplified version of itself. um, that would necessarily make it way lighter in terms of size, right? It wouldn't be like a really big file size. It would just be um, something that would have to be interpreted at the endpoint. So you would just need DAB. You could transfer that through like a like a USB or something. I know I sound a little crazy right now because I'm hearing myself, but I'm yapping about this because I have it written down somewhere, but I can't find it, and it's frustrating. So I'm kind of stream of consciousness. So, um, yeah. So you take this part right here. All that you would need is on the endpoint. Let's say my laptop. I would need an interpreter. I would need to have a dictionary that can tell me what DAB means and the rules with which to apply uh, any kind of interpretation thereof. Okay, what am I talking about? I could theoretically have a big dictionary of let's call them words or phrases or encryptions or encodings that let's say that we make a standard for it. I could take a picture or a video or audio or whatever, encode it using those rules, and take it to the laptop or to the computer or the database or whatever, right? And the file size itself would be really small, but doing this correctly could allow you to transfer a huge amount of data relative to the size of the encoding, right? So instead of all this stuff, you could just use this stuff. And I think that this might be something that AI is doing now because it's a lot clunkier to use, I think, natural language to communicate, like for a computer to communicate with another computer. Um, so they create their own abstractions. If I'm not mistaken, there's way more effective ways for them to communicate with one another, AIs and computers in general. So I think that this might be something along those lines, where it's the reverse of what we have now, right? Let's say that you have like a 512 gig SSD, and you have like a 2 gigabyte um, thumb drive. You're limited by the size of the storage on your thumb drive, but and you're limited by the size of the storage that you can have on your laptop. But let's say in this hypothetical scenario, you could have like a petabyte hard drive, and within that hard drive is encoded every possible combination of this these little these rules, right? And you could essentially apply those rules to any piece of media, shrink it down to size, and transfer it super rapidly. Um, it would just be the endpoint's responsibility to kind of decode that. The endpoint would have to be this big old um, dictionary, I guess, of possible combinations. And what that would allow basically is, with the same rule set or the same dictionary, you could encrypt any combination of information and decrypt it at the endpoint um, losslessly, just by using a specific algorithm or method of interpretation. I really don't think that I'm articulating this crazy. I mean, excuse me, I don't think that I'm articulating this correctly, because it's very late and I have no idea why I'm even talking about this at this hour. It's just been sitting in the back of my head for literal ages. And I want to start talking about certain things like this because I've noticed that I can intuit the solution to a problem without having the lower level understanding of how to actually solve it, if that makes sense. I think I can grasp conceptually how to solve certain problems without having the actual technical know-how to execute, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the great things about AI now, is that I don't necessarily have to have that skill set entirely myself now. I can just ask questions until I either learn it or the AI can kind of execute on it. So um, I might even run the transcript of this through AI to see if A, something like this already exists, because I'm sure something like it does. And B, if it doesn't exist, am I in wacky tobacco land? Is this tinfoil like goofy? I just think it's a potentially novel way of doing things. And what it would require is everybody would have a really, and maybe you wouldn't even necessarily have to have a really big storage media. Like you wouldn't have to have like a petabyte SSD or hard drive or whatever. You might not need that, given AI is really good at. Okay, that's neither here nor there. All I'm saying is that, in my mind, as a child, I guess you would say, all that would really require is that you have a lot of storage space in a computer with this big old dictionary. You can call it a dictionary, whatever it is. But that would mean transferring the information. The amount of information you'd have to transfer is way less. So instead of like instead of like having to encode in binary ones and zeros, what if you had access to another number like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? I know that that's not a novel concept, or maybe I'm again not articulating exactly what I'm trying to express correctly. But if you had a consistent set of rules to abstract any given concept down and then use that set of rules to do so, you could have very small file sizes, and all it would require is that every user, every endpoint, like a laptop or anybody's computer, would just have a big old dictionary with which to interpret that rule set. I think that's the gist of what I'm trying to express. Yeah. So I'm probably going to run this transcript through AI to see if it even makes sense, and maybe I'll make an update video. But the thing is that, like I was saying briefly, I've noticed in myself the ability to intuit problems, the solution to problems that exist, and in real time, the last 20 years of my life, I've seen certain things come to pass that I considered also eventualities, but I never tracked them or wrote them down. So this is partially for my own ego to be able to say, hey, yeah, I called it, right? Maybe not I called it, because I don't think ideas are necessarily special. I think anybody can have ideas. And to a certain extent, really good ideas are not necessarily very rare. What's very rare is the ability to also execute on them. And I think I'm getting better at that. But yeah, part of it is ego, but part of it is genuine curiosity and a genuine desire to see something like this kind of done, if that makes sense. Even if I don't do it, like I want to see this kind of thing done. There are lots of things like that I've thought about for a long time, and some of them, for example, like they released this paper on AI, and we were talking about agents, and for me, it was very, very clear 2 years ago, because I don't know why agents are suddenly becoming very popular, because I thought they've been very popular for the last year and a half, 2 years. But like 2 years ago, I was like, dude, agents have to be one of the big stepping stones. And like last week, I was talking to another friend about AI. And one of the things that really frustrates me about the whole AI hype is that I believe that where there's smoke, there's fire, right? When I was young, I heard about Bitcoin, I heard about crypto, like 2010, 11. I knew about it, but I was essentially a teenager. I had no access to that kind of thing, but I was really, really interested, and I kind of let it slip through the cracks. Stuff like that several times has happened to me, and I was at a crucial crossroads without realizing it. And with the benefit of retrospect, you realize, holy crap, I missed out on these things that I could feel something there. And most recently, that was AI, and it really frustrates me that for years prior, I would say even decades prior, people have been talking about AI and how important it would be, and how dangerous it could be, and how amazing it could be. And I never took it seriously, and that really frustrates me. So I thought the last several years since AI became kind of, I guess you would call it the zeitgeist of whatever the heck we're living through, this is definitely a really important time. But so I was thinking to myself, okay, so I missed the boat, quote unquote, here, and it's a pretty big boat to miss, and it kind of sucks. It hurts my ego that I didn't see this coming, not for any other reason except for as my ego, right? So if we're trying to think logically about what the next shift could be, for me, the obvious choice, let's say that AI is a brand new cultural, or let's call it a new industrial revolution. It's probably bigger than the industrial revolution, but let's call it the new internet, right? AI is the next internet of things, right? Not the next internet of things. It's the next thing like the internet. Okay. So that begs the question: what's the next social network, and what's the next AI? So I think that the next AI is, the only thing that I can possibly consider is more world shaking, would have to be quantum technology. So I think that within 10 years, that'll be probably the next big thing, right? And then what I was talking to my friend about was, like, because this is almost verbatim what we were talking about. I was like, I'm sick of being behind the curve. So what's next? And I was thinking, well, right now we're in the middle of the AI like hype cycle, right? So what would the next equivalent to social media be? And for me, I think there was again a video game. What was it called? My friend, one of my very very good friends, showed me this video game. I can't believe that I'm forgetting it. Give me 1 second. I need to look it up. What was the name of that game? I always forget it. Oh my god. Um. Oh yeah, Dreamfall, The Longest Journey. So there's this game called Dreamfall: The Longest Journey, and I only played a little bit of it. It's a pretty old game, and the protagonist of that game has this little monkey, I think, and it's essentially an AI assistant. And I myself, well, let's say that it's 12:34 in the morning for me, and I'm making a video about ideas and just yapping to nobody in particular because I just felt like it. If this doesn't strike you as something that somebody with ADHD does, I'm not really sure what would, but I'm fairly certain that I have ADHD and I would be a pretty high functioning manifestation of that. I'm undiagnosed, but pretty sure. And all this to say, um, now that we have these tools at our disposal, I decided, okay, I'm gonna build systems to help make me more effective in my professional life. Um, Timers, schedulers, reminders, like calendars. I want to make like a to-do app, and I want ideally for it to be kind of like an AI partner that can track kind of what I'm doing and train me and teach me and help me and be kind of like a tutor slash buddy, and yeah, like teach me stuff and keep me on track, right? Not accountability necessarily, something more like literally an assistant, like what Siri should be, right? Um, and honestly, I think that the next social media is going to be what Siri should have been this whole time, what Siri actually is for people. And I think a good way to gauge what that next thing will be is by showing people this technology or these technologies, showing people that don't know anything about it and seeing how they first use it. I have an aunt who's not super tech savvy, but I showed her some AI applications and watching how she interacts with it and how she thinks something of this caliber would or should react is indicative to me of what should be in a product for it to bring value to a mass audience, if that makes sense. So some of her first questions were, tell me a joke. I need this, and this from this place and this, that, a little bit more complicated. But for them, this is what it should do and how it should do it. And obviously it doesn't do that in its current iteration. But I think that in the future, and I told my friend this, I said that I think the next social media moment will be personal AI companions that grow with you, remember what you do and how you do it, and train you and teach you, basically personal tutors. And I do think that we can extrapolate that if that's the case, education, the future of any kind of training or coaching, a lot of things start to shift and change. And it's so weird because this week, the Zuck drops a video and a transcript saying that this is exactly what they're going to focus on. And so again, my ego is hurt because I'm not claiming that I have any kind of I'm not claiming that I would be anything other than able to identify patterns accurately ahead of time. That's kind of the only reason I'm making the video, is because I want to be able to say, hey, I have a fairly good track record of being able to identify potential trends and their probabilities ahead of time and potentially act on it, which is ironic given my interest in statistics and my lack of skill in even basic arithmetic, let alone statistics, probability, or any of that other stuff. But like I said, I do have I very strongly feel that I have the ability to intuit some of this stuff, and sometimes just guessing. You don't know why you have like a muscle memory or how guessing can be accurate, but it is. Um, and I think that might be one of the things that AI can't really do well. That um, human beings, once they hit a flow state, they're not thinking anymore; they're just doing. Um, in a way, that might be partially uh, something that AI is like behind on, if that makes sense. But I also have this kind of theory that humans can learn the way that AI does, and indeed, I think they do. So, for example, I think we're only limited by time. So, with respect to something like learning how to play chess, I think if I just went as quickly as possible and just played a good like a gorillion rounds of chess without thinking, only seeking to slightly iteratively improve each round, but just did it as quickly as possible, as fast as possible, and as many rounds as physically possible, trying to learn one small thing every iteration, I think I could get really, really good at chess in a relatively short amount of time. Not with studying, not with taking my time and trying to overanalyze every single step of the way. I think like we can also learn from how AI learns. The heuristic way of learning, I think, would just be by doing the thing until you're vomiting, until you can't feel anymore, until all that you can think of is that thing, and then at that point you're not thinking. You're just like you wouldn't be able to tell somebody why you're doing what you're doing. You just know it's the right thing to do, and I think that you could do that with a lot of skills. I really do, like because at the end of the day, it just becomes pattern recognition. And I think that that's kind of what AI does. I think, like when you're talking about vision models and uh, reinforcement training and weights and stuff like that, all you're doing is just identifying really similar patterns a gajillion times, overlapping them, and see kind of like, okay, I have a pretty good there's a high statistical probability that this is the peace sign. This is a thumbs up. There's a pretty high probability that that specific thing that's on my screen happens to be a thumbs up. And I think that we can extend that logic to the way that we also behave as humans, right? Like I really think that, for example, if I want to become better at cooking, it wouldn't be about I think there is value in slowing down and being very deliberate and being very methodical and being very slow and painfully even. I think there's a lot of value in doing that. But I also think that the opposite is true, that you could, not the opposite, but you could learn a lot very rapidly, not by necessarily deliberately learning, but just by brute forcing and brute doing, like doing it over and over and over and over again, and just improving small steps or big steps too. But I just mean like improving iteratively over a long period of time, because that's what they're doing with a lot of these models. Like I just saw that they're training these robots by simulating their movements. In a like virtual environment. So they're training them like the equivalent of 10 years in just a couple of hours with virtual, like in a virtual like sandbox, if that makes sense. And so they have a gajillion iterations of a virtual version of a real life robot, training it 10 years worth of movement data and real-time physics in 2 hours. They upload that to the actual robots, and they are actually walking. So I think that we could do something similar. Um, yeah. I think a lot of the intuition that we have as humans probably comes from somewhere in our subconscious, and we couldn't necessarily articulate why certain things are, but we just know they are. And call that evolution, call it experience, call it, I don't know if it's ingrained in our, genetics somewhere. Um, but there has to be something underlying there that also allows us to learn so rapidly and so quickly. Um, Especially considering, now that I think about it, there are so many people who have severe brain damage, who even have a fraction of their brain remaining, but can retain most of their daily functions, and uh, live and work relatively normal lives with like half of their brain missing. You know what I mean? In my own case, my grandmother, she had multiple strokes. A lot of her brain had died, and we didn't know it. She didn't know it, and she was relatively healthy and normal until she passed away. And we didn't know until well after it was too late to kind of do anything about it. Um, all this to say, I think that AI might also help us learn at a rate that we previously were unable to, um, which is kind of like, we now have a firm grasp of the obvious. But um, yeah, I'm very interested in both learning but also applying what I've learned to accurately predict what could come next. And to some extent, there's a limit to how much you can actually do that, especially in the age of AI. I mean, it was already difficult before AI, um, but now it's almost impossible, given the kind of exponential rate of progress in every conceivable field, um, thanks to AI. But I do think that we could still hit certain beats, historical beats, if you want to call them that. One thing that we should look at in trying to predict what will happen next is behavior, and how humans naturally tend to behave in given situations. So right now, there's this, we're talking about the Gen Z stare, right? We're talking about iPad babies, and we're talking about this hyper individualistic culture that is already here but growing day by day. Hyper individualism, hyper egoism, if you want to call it that, the death of the celebrity, um, the death of many ways of living and communicating. Um, and we take it to its logical conclusion. It could be a very negative way, but it could also be a very positive thing as well. So I promise this links to it in a certain way, but like, Amazon heralded the death of the brick and mortar store the same way that Walmart heralded the death of the mom and pop shop, right? So what's next? How do we extrapolate next? This was kind of what people thought 3D printing was going to be, including myself. But again, I was a child when 3D printing was growing, and I could see that it was going to be big in the future as well. I was like literally 13, and I thought 3D printing is the future. And right now, for me, what that future could be, I think, comes from the fact that I was on the road, and we bought these tomatoes from a farmer on the side of the road. When I tell you that was the most flavorful, I had never tasted a tomato before. Okay, before that point, it was so good. And this was relatively recently, but it kind of reinforced something that I've thought about for a while. And it's this idea that, for example, the same way that Amazon kind of killed Walmart, I think the next thing that'll probably kill Amazon is decentralization of pretty much everything. So the decentralization of a farm or the supply chain and making it local again could potentially kill Amazon or be the next incarnation of Amazon, right? Because I don't think that behemoth is going anywhere. But what I'm saying is, if you could have a decentralized way to farm in a way that we don't rely on these big giga billionaire multinational corporations that control even patents on seeds and stuff like that, if you could have it to where within a city or a county, tons and tons and tons of farmers, quote unquote, are growing produce in their own houses, or maybe like one person specializes in tomatoes, another specializes in carrots, another in watermelons or exotic fruits or stuff like that. If they could grow those things in their own backyards or within like a shipping container, or maybe it's not within a house, but it's a small business on a corner somewhere. The decentralization of these supply chains and farming, for example, would both be of great benefit to the local communities and food deserts, things like that, but also provide more nutritious, less wasteful, more ripe produce that isn't picked prematurely so that it can be ripe at the time that you get to the end user or the consumer, right? Because what's happening, for example, when you get a grapefruit or you're getting, let's say, dragon fruit, that's a great example. You get a dragon fruit, they pick it so far behind that it has almost no flavor. It tastes like water. It's disgusting. Have you all ever had a actually good ripe grape? I mean, dragon fruit? They taste amazing. But because of supply chain, it's going to be on a truck for days, if not weeks, before it gets to you. That's why it tastes gross, right? That's why when avocados arrive to the store, they're like hard as a rock. And what that causes is that a lot of those nutrients that are in the food are not necessarily in the fruit or the vegetables that we get, because they have to pick them early. They have to pick them underripe so that they can ripen on the way to the consumer. And so the decentralization of farms would both save local farms, minimize the need for centralized supply chain. I'm not saying that we have centralized supply chain, for the record. I'm just saying, like, there's a big difference from a truck going from California to Texas than a billion smaller trucks going from Anaheim to Los Angeles, or from Dallas to Austin, right? That's a trip that you can make in a couple hours, Dallas to Austin, right? So if we have, instead of a few big, massive corporations, a billion smaller ones, like the equivalent of the mom and pop shop for stuff like that, you would still have at your Amazon, you would still have your big companies, things like that. But I definitely think that would be like one way to kind of do that. And if you could figure out how to be like a vertically integrated mom and pop shop, like, that's the dream. You know what I mean? If you could source your seeds, plant your produce, grow it yourself, get all of your containers and stuff yourself, drive it yourself, you can make a great living doing that. And on top of that, now we have AI systems that can monitor your crops and give like the optimal amount of, like, in a very small footprint, you could grow a lot of food. And this is only semi-related, but I also think that, for example, the seaweed industry in the United States is basically, I'm not going to say non-existent, but it should be a lot bigger than it is, and I think will be a lot bigger than it is right now. Because from seaweed, you can make fuel, you can make consumables, so like medicines, gels. It's used in shampoo. It's used in food, like as agar, like it's vegan version of gelatin. You can use it. Okay, so fuel, consumables, food, and there's one more. I forgot, but all this to say, that's a conversation for another time. Just kind of trying to brain dump this stuff because otherwise it's going to be in here and I'm not going to be able to sleep. So, yeah. Um, so yeah, that's why I'm losing all my hair because all these ideas are popping out. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with any of this, but we'll have a conversation another day.